Nation has said that Afghanistan is going to go through a catastrophe. So it's a very catastrophic situation right now. And luckily, Afghanistan has not been forgotten. And there was a United Nations meeting today in Geneva. And there are some countries that have pledged some money. However, the key is the Taliban's behavior, because the money that has been offered, I think most of them are conditional.
And to that point, then, in terms of the conditions, we've seen that a lot of organizations and countries, they want to help the people of Afghanistan, but they don't want to have to go through the Taliban. How can these organizations put words into actions with that strategy?
It will be very difficult for development and humanitarian organizations to bypass the Taliban. However, I think there are ways. And the United Nations and other international organizations, they could do an excellent job in terms of delivering the much needed humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. They have access to the country, but also they have access to the neighboring countries that could be used to reach to the internally displaced people and to refugees, to whoever is in need.
And to that point, talk about the most urgent needs that Afghans have at the moment.
A lot of Afghans right now, they are struggling with day-to-day basic needs, such as food, groceries, and there's about 3.5 million people that they have been displaced. So they also need shelter. And particularly, there's also the issue of women being displaced. They need hygiene. They need all the products that they need. And the fact that the money, Afghanistan's funds are being held at U.S. banks, there's no flow of cash, and people are running out of cash also. So I hope that this conference would encourage the world to go ahead and at least provide some relief, the basic needs, and also the areas that are actually blockaded by the Taliban. I hope that the United Nations and others could find their way to those regions also, so that people in those regions also receive aid.
So even before the Taliban takeover, they talk about some of the challenges that the country was already facing.
So even before the Taliban, there were issues with, drought. There were issues with this poverty, this humanitarian crisis that we are talking about. It's not directly as a result of the Taliban occupation, but I think it's the Taliban had a role to play. For years, they have been fighting. There was an insurgency that did not allow for the government to do the kind of things that the government would want it to do, such as implementing bigger economic projects. So there were interruptions because of the fighting, but also there were corruption within the government that did not allow for Afghanistan to grow. And the departure of the foreign troops that has started gradually in 2014 also added to this mess, because thousands of Afghans who were employed by the foreigners, they were all of a sudden unemployed. And the transactions that were taking place under these presence of these foreign troops and NGOs and whatnot, those also reduced drastically.
So now that the Taliban has taken power, then what is their role in trying to get aid to the people who need it? What are people expecting from them?
I think people are expecting from them to allow aid agencies to operate, especially the Afghan employees of these organizations they should not be harassed just because they're working for international organizations, because there's this stigma with local Afghans working for international NGOs or the United Nations. That the Taliban usually they have targeted those people who are working for the international community. So I think people would hope that the Taliban would allow Afghans to work and also allow the United Nations offices to operate across the country, and also if there are expats that are coming from other countries, that their safety is ensured.
And you did mention that some of the surrounding countries could play a role in getting aid to the country. What about internet? What about beyond those borders? What about China and other big donors? What sort of role do you see them playing and their donations?
I think China has also offered to assist in ways, especially with COVID-19 vaccination and some emergency funds. But they could play a greater role. I don't know how much, because China, even before the Taliban takeover, China was involved in Afghanistan. In 2014, when President Ghani went to visit China on his first state visit, he met with President Xi Jinping, where he promised more than $350 million. I don't know how much of that has been dispersed. And if there are any remainings that should be dispersed to the people of Afghanistan, it doesn't have to be dispersed to the government of the Taliban. The international community could make a distinction between the regime and the people.
And to that point, you do mention that this is a crisis on top of a crisis, given you have COVID on top of everything else. What is at stake if the people of Afghanistan don't get the aid and support they need?
I fear that a lot of people would starve to death. A lot of people would be displaced. They would, leave the country. They are already planning to leave. They would go to Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia, wherever they can. So those are like some of the, the immediate fears that I have. I hope that they find a way to prevent this. It is a catastrophe. I agree with the United Nations Secretary General.